Hello, everybody. Good morning. Welcome back to our weekly ship show. My name is Jason Brand. I'm the Director of Outreach and Partner Development here at Supply Chain Solutions. And for this week, we've got our Freight Market Roundup. So to start off, if you haven't joined us before, it's our goal in our Freight Market Roundup to do a 15-minute blast of information about rates, key takeaways coming from our customers or the teams inside of our company of like, what are we building our strategy around? What are the big elements here that are affecting the market? And our goal is to kind of share this with you. So you've got a really good idea of how we're making our decisions and hopefully empower you to make better decisions yourself. We do this every other week. Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern, live. So make sure you join. You can actually subscribe and sign up. And then the weeks in between, we bring in some industry experts, some guests. Also, we take a couple topics and we dive deeper into them because we got to get through this nice and quick. We want to squeeze this into a little post-lunch debrief, so to speak. Anyway, so want to get this show on the road. Let's get going. And let me break down the formula just in case. So we're going to talk about the ocean market first. We're going to work our way from the Trans-Pacific to the Transatlantic. Then we're going to flip over to the air freight market, chat about that. And in between, I'll throw in some of those things that our teams are focused on. Hopefully, I've got a decent amount of good facts and figures for you that we're basing some decisions on today. So get yourself ready, get a notepad out, or don't, just get your mental peg system out and we'll get going. If you're a customer of ours, the average you paid last week on the Trans-Pacific, and to be specific, we're talking about China, Southeast Asia, and coming into destinations on the U.S. West Coast, you likely paid around $4,300 per 40-foot container you shipped. Now, on the previous Freight Market Roundup, or FMR as we call it, we talked about how we're right in the middle of contract season. Actually, we're well into contract season now. And what's been happening in the contract market has really been pulling up our average shipment cost. It's also been tugging the spot market up with it as well. So rates, they are nearly up by 60% over month on this lane. And they're up actually 200% since January. Now, there are a few providers who have some contracted rates from back when people weren't shipping nearly as much, and they're kind of advertising those. And there's also some people that are going through an RFP process right now, right? It's relatively common around this time, a little bit sooner. And they're kind of in this weird zone where they're in between what rates used to be, right? And what rates really are. And quite frankly, if you can get your hands on some of those ultra low rates, you totally should do it. But you need to make sure you've got a plan B, because quite frankly, what's going to happen is the same thing we saw before. Those rates that were happening at the end of last year, they're totally unsustainable. And what's happening in the market, as you see in the $4,300 per 40-foot container, which is up 200% since January, is it's kind of a return to reality of sorts. We actually went through this a couple weeks ago, just talking about what's been happening month over month in port volumes at each port. We broke down everything. And it's actually, I didn't want to ring the bell of like, yay, we're recovered. No, I didn't want to do that. But the goal of that was cautiously be optimistic, because we're definitely seeing a stability when it comes to the amount of volume. Anyway, but if you can get your hands on some of those ultra low rates, do it. But get ready for that not to be honored, or you to be last in line to get on the vessel in a few months here as stuff really soaks up. So I want to add in one more Trans-Pacific lane before we move on. And the reason why we actually brought this up on the last FMR, let's talk about Southeast Asia and China and shipments going into the West Coast of Mexico. And this has been an incredibly hot lane. It really is taking the spotlight recently because of just how hot it's been. So if you're a customer of ours, what our customers were shipping actually last week was an average of $5,600 per 40-foot container. Obviously, that's more expensive than the $4,300, but just to kind of give some comparisons and kind of compare the price increase we've seen, or the slope with the U.S. West Coast and the U.S. the West Coast of Mexico. Switch that formula up there. So shipments into the U.S., as I mentioned, we saw that price increase by roughly 200% between January 1st. And now heading down to the Mexican West Coast, shipments coming out of Asia headed in to Mexico's West Coast. In just 60 days, they saw rates increase by 280%. So you basically got roughly a 6-month timeline in the US West Coast of a 200% increase and a 60-day timeline of a 280% increase happening in Mexico. And what's funny about that is it's actually shown it to be a very robust rate. So roughly a month ago, carriers were noticing and they deployed a lot more capacity onto this lane to kind of soak up. Obviously, you know, it was coming out of a very low freight period. They wanted to kind of soak up these higher rates. And despite that happening, there was 3 new services added. Despite that happening, we're still seeing that really strong increase, which is very, very just indicating a healthy Mexico market. Actually, it's indicating a couple things, and we'll dive into that next week. I want to totally focus on what's happening in Mexico. We'll kind of give you some details on that in the future. But let's move over to our transatlantic lanes, specifically shipments that are leaving European ports headed into the U.S. East Coast. So last week, our customers, they paid an average of right around $2,000 per 40-foot container for crossing the Atlantic. Now, we talked about this a little bit over the last few weeks, and this is going to be a huge just discussion point throughout the year. But the ILAs has their contract negotiation. It's happening later this year. I believe it's September 30th is when the contract is due. They have announced they will strike if a contract is not reached by that point. They're asking for more than they've ever asked for before, and they're being more aggressive than ever before. And also, if we just compare this to what happened on the West Coast, their contract was due, I get this date a little bit wrong. I believe it was June 30th, and they didn't sign till the following year in spring. So, you know, by comparison, they do have very different processes. So it is a little bit of an apples to orange thing. And so that's a little bit of a slippery slope to do that comparison. But that is some pretty bold thinking. We'll talk about that more as the year goes on. But anyway, what we are expecting with the East Coast and what we've seen in the East Coast is a really slow degradation of this rate. I mean, it's been very slow. We're talking about our average dropping, $50 a week, and it's been happening since February. So, all indications point to that continuing. The caveat there is we are really, really in low rate territory, and you're at a point where there's been a lot of investment in the East Coast. Also, a lot of the ocean liners they've had to upgrade their ships to these dual fuel systems. There's a lot of these new carbon emission standards coming out and requirements. So just the cost of shipping has increased. And so you are really butting up with a cost floor, and that will eventually just cause ocean liners to pull capacity because they're just not making money. So that is approaching, but it's hard to say when. We don't have a crystal ball. Now, let's talk about the just ocean shipping market in general. So April, we saw vessel schedule reliability to the U.S. West and East Coast actually reach their highest level in the last 6 months. And what's cool about this is it actually happened despite a global decline in performance. Now, this had some very clear reasons. It was due to the Red Sea and Suez Canal diversions, but still very, very interesting kind of twist. On-time performance from Asia to the U.S. West Coast, it rose by 9.6 percentage points, bringing it up to 58.8%. It's actually the highest it's been since November. And these are significant improvements. When we look at the largest 34 trade lanes, it really shows clearly. You can kind of see the dips in performance and such when these diversions started. And it was almost as if the U.S. West Coast remained unaffected the entire time, which is really, really cool. Now, let's flip over and talk about reliability into the U.S. East Coast. That actually also increased in the same time period. It went up by 2.5 percentage points. Now, there's a caveat here. It only brought the average up to 40.1% of the time, but it is still and also the best it's been since last November. Now, conversely, if we look at that global schedule reliability, it fell across the board by 2.5 percentage points. So remember, obviously, that's considering US West Coast and East Coast increases in that global percentage point decrease. So it's a little bit sandbagged in some ways. The average across the board was 52.1% in April, and that's the lowest it's been since January of this year. But April also is a massive decline from the year before. So right now, April, 52.1%. Last year, April, 64.2% was where it was at. So definitely not awesome. Despite this decline, if we really look into what are the late arrival averages and things, So the average late arriving vessels, it did improve by 0.31 days. It brought the global average up to 4.74 days, or technically down to. When talking about the US, the delays for the Asia to US West Coast trade, that reduced by a whole 1.03 days. That brought the average down to 4.36. And for Asia to US East Coast, there was a reduction in that late arrival by 0.33 days, and that brought the average down to 5.55. So, in general, what you should be kind of taking away from this is the ocean market is enjoying some better performance right now, at least in the US. And there's also, we've talked about this in previous shows, we're seeing more volume. And clearly, we're also seeing higher rates that seem to be sustainable. Now, that's all great for the ocean market. But if you take a look at the trucking market, we're seeing an extremely different experience. And there's a couple articles that came out that highlight this. They're focused on C.H. Robinson and they're focused on RXO. So C.H. Robinson, they had their credit rating downgraded by the S&P Global Ratings from a BB plus to a BBB. It is the second lowest investment grade. This downgrade, it comes nearly a year after the S&P reduced the outlook for C.H. Robinson to negative. And this was also happening despite C.H. Robinson indicating that they had good first quarter earnings and a potential turnaround coming up. Now, this downgrade also reflects concerns over the company's funds from operations ratio. It's called FFO, and it has been declining for some time now. So C.H. Robinson's FFO to debt fell by 26% in the fourth quarter, and it puts it at a threshold that's below what's needed to maintain that BBB plus rating. That all being said, they're still in that investment grade territory, and they did announce that they're working to totally overhaul and build a new operating model that is hopefully going to drive better results. This is such an interesting thing here, though, right? Because the timing and the fact that they're not in that non-investment territory at this moment might just work to their advantage because, as we're seeing, obviously, in the ocean shipping market, these increases. Eventually, it will trickle in, you'd assume. But we are going to have to check back in, see how this new operating model works. At this point, it has been just a downgrade and not looking too fantastic. In that same period, S&P Global Ratings also downgraded RXO. They're doing a little bit worse, though, from BB plus. BBB plus was C.H. Robinson. This is BB plus to BB. It is pushing it further into the non-investment grade territory. And this decision is primarily due to just weaker earnings and bad cash flow, which RXO has pointed to. And they've said, hey, this is a direct result of the prolonged freight market we're currently in. That's literally what they've said. RXO's FFO to debt ratio is expected to be in the low 20% range so far throughout 2024. And that is honestly a significant drop from what they were forecasting it to be. So there is a bit of a lesson, I think, to be learned here for us all. And they have been very focused on growing their market share. But RXO's efforts, they've not offset just the lower rates in the current trucking market. And it truly has resulted in a sort of poison pill for the company. And it's being reflected in almost a 60% decline in their FFO ratio. So not fun. Now, there is so much we've got to cover. And generally speaking, I mean, we could turn these things into 2-hour episodes, but I don't think you want to hear me drone on for that long. We got to make them bite-sized and enjoyable. So we got to keep this thing moving. We're going to move over to our air freight market. Let's just talk about it. So we're going to be focusing right now on Southeast Asia and China coming into the US. And our customers, as of last week, were paying $6.50 a kilo to airship. That was across all origins. When we talk about the low we're seeing from all destinations and all origins, we saw a low of $5.95 a kilogram and a high of $6.86 a kilogram. One of the things I want to say is obviously this range is really, it's been kind of consistent. And pardon me. Better. Air cargo demand and rate levels from Asia to the US and Europe, actually, they've all been really unusually high for this time of the year. This is still happening despite a huge increase in belly capacity as a lot of these new summer schedules come out for the airlines. And this surge is aligning with the early peak season that we're seeing in container shipping and a lot of robust e-commerce activity. So it's utilizing all available air freight at this point. We actually dove into this a little bit more about how a couple companies, Timu and Shein, are sucking up a ton of capacity direct out of China shipping. And we're also having kind of a little bit of a supply and demand dilemma here happening with the amount of air freighters that are going to have to be retired in the next 2 years compared to the full air freight market. So IATA, the International Air Transport Association, they reported an 11.1% increase in global air freight demand, and that was at the start of Q2. They are really suggesting this seems to be a very wellspring structural increase in demand in the sector. Now, typically, though, what we see is late spring sees a dip in air cargo, and this is just due to that increased passenger capacity that comes in when people are traveling more. You've got more belly space. Now there is more supply. Demand remains the same, and you see a dip. We're not seeing that. So you got to keep your eyes on this if you're focusing on a air freight style shipping. Oof, you're just going to be paying more than normal. And we've watched this rate right now hover right around the same point. We've seen it a little bit highs. It's dipped into the sevens. Obviously nothing compared to what we saw during the pandemic, but it is a new norm we're seeing for Southeast Asia and China to US shipping. And if your business is built around that, it's a very expensive new norm. We actually are working on a consolidation program, air, coming out of China. We're going to start purchasing bulk space, and hopefully be able to kind of undercut these rates a little bit. So, if you are regularly air shipping, reach out to us. We want to figure out and see how much demand out of our customer base is there to see if it's kind of a good decision. And we'll go forward. We've actually already been doing that out of Europe, and it's been very, very successful. We've got a few new destinations now. We are now going into Mexico as well, which has been fantastic for our Mexican operation. And we actually only use air freighters. We don't use passenger planes. There's a lot of reasons for that. And definitely our customers get to see the service improvements too. Anyway, everybody, really appreciate you guys for joining us today. I always feel like I'm cutting you guys short because truly, there's just a lot going on right now. But make sure you join us next week. I'm going to be talking about Mexico. You'll see some of that content coming out here shortly. And in the following weeks, we've got some fantastic guests joining us as well. So thank you again so much for joining us on a weekly basis. We really appreciate you. Make it a great week, and we will talk again, or I will. You'll hear me again soon. Thanks. Bye.